This is Teacher's Corner from Stenhouse Publishers. I'm Nate Butler.
We're all entering really uncharted territory of how to move our math lessons into this virtual world in a large way, even if it's just for a couple months, and then the world gets better.
Working in spaces that we haven't had to think about and navigate in quite the same way before, and so it's a time of reinvention.
That's Chris Luzniak, author of Up for Debate, and Mandy Jansen, author of Rough Draft Math. As our nation begins a new school year, we reached out to Chris and Mandy to share their experiences teaching during the pandemic, how communication with students and colleagues has changed, and the challenges and opportunities presented in moving math discussion from the classroom to Zoom sessions. So what's the current state of your state with regard to back to school plans? Mandy, in Delaware, if my information is up to date, you have 3 possible scenarios depending on how things develop in the coming weeks, yes?
So the governor got together a committee and some working groups and did surveys of students and parents and teachers, and they developed 3 plans depending on how extensive the cases are at that time. And, the plans are what it takes to be fully online, what it takes to be hybrid, these various versions. So we're told that the governor will come out with a clearer stance sometime in early August. And so that's for the K-12 system. And so a lot of us who are teachers or work with teachers, that uncertainty creates another level of stress because folks want to plan, but then also they want to be safe and be healthy. So the state, I think I've really appreciated the way they've taken into account a lot of different stakeholders' perspectives when making the plan. And right now there are guidelines and recommendations to think about. So we don't know what phase we're going to be in for the schools, but once we are told about that, then kind of what the recommendations are from there.
And you're a professor at University of Delaware?
Yes, I work at the University of Delaware, and I teach future teachers, and then I do professional development with practicing teachers. So I teach undergrads, and the University of Delaware originally had a plan that we were going to be some version of hybrid, where it would be face-to-face one week and then off-campus the other week, and kind of alternating which classes were on campus. But just last week, they changed and they said, we're all going to be online. So now that looks like the fall is going to be online. Originally, it was going to be hybrid through Thanksgiving and then online after Thanksgiving, but now it's all online.
I wonder if universities are, in general, better equipped for online learning compared to K-12 schools.
That's an interesting question. So universities often had already offered a range of classes online before, and so there were models in place, but individual faculty were inconsistently prepared and ready. So some folks who have never taught an online class before, it was the same kind of big lift. And then the question about what is more equitable or supportive of students to be synchronous or asynchronous was a decision often left to the faculty member to sort out with their students. And that was a complicated set of decisions to make as well.
Are you going to be more synchronous in your classes?
So I moved my class. I taught a math class for future elementary teachers, and I moved that class online. And I did a lot of surveying of the students, what resources they had, where they were going to be able to access the internet. Would it be fast enough for synchronous? Would they have printers? What do they have? And based on that, and then the overwhelming student response, we want a math class to be synchronous. We want a math class to be in real time. So because they seem to have the Wi-Fi access in my class, we went synchronous. And I think one reason why it worked is that they had some other classes that were asynchronous. And so I worry if all of their classes were synchronous, what kind of drain that would be on them. But they seem to appreciate the real-time nature of it.
And Chris, you teach in Los Angeles County, right?
Correct. Yeah. So LA and San Diego just a few weeks ago just declared that they're going fully online for the entire fall semester. I'm at an independent school, so we don't have to follow that, but we at least are going to start the year fully online. Kind of like Mandy was saying, we had a hybrid plan of like kind of like a week on campus and a week online, but that's now pushed off for some time in the future when we can do that. So I think for at least August, September, we're definitely online, and we're going to kind of take it month to month and see how things go. It's really hard because our school is so much built on the quirky, fun community building. I'm at an all-girls school, and so the relationships and the presence on campus and all the fun, weird things we do as part of our school culture is such a trademark for the students. It's really hard for them to be separated and aligned.
Chris, did it reduce any sort of stress for you when the school said we're going to go completely online, or are you missing the notion that you could see them face to face sometimes? How did you feel?
I think it was, for both myself and many colleagues, it was stress reducing rather than the uncertainty of this kind of back and forth. Are we going to open online, or are we going to still do a hybrid? It was kind of like waiting from day to day. And so just having a decision, even if if the world suddenly got better tomorrow, like just having a decision in place so that now I can plan for a couple weeks from now. It's not that far away till the first day. And we can figure out together as a department and as a faculty, like how to best connect with students online and start the courses and start the year online. It's really helpful. Just the more advanced notice we get, the more I can start to plan ahead. And I imagine same for you.
I'm actually on sabbatical next school
Oh,
year, so I'm not teaching. I'm working on research and writing, but I very much am invested in what's happening because, my colleagues, teachers I collaborate with, but I would have already been at home.
lucky timing.
Chris, you mentioned about the relationship building that happens at the beginning of the year. How are you and your colleagues? How are you going to do that online?
Relationships and like social emotional learning, all that stuff is at the forefront of all of our faculty's thinking, and definitely all the questions that come up within our department meetings that we've had a couple optional department meetings over the summer. Everyone's really concerned, but also constantly thinking about it and coming up with different ideas and sharing with each other. I just think a lot about like I think our first lesson back is going to be a lot more getting to know you and like silly icebreaker questions and activities and things than I even would normally do when we would be in person in the first day or two. Our middle schools having 2 full extra days earlier than the high school, so they can have a lot more time. A lot of those students are brand new to the school because we're a 6th through 12 school, so a lot of our 6th and 7th graders are new to the school. So they want to have lots of time of just getting connected and building a little bit of relationships and getting to know the teachers in the school and the online routines as well. I'm thinking a lot about like Mandy, you were saying, my math students really did like synchronous. I like even just like a 20 minutes of synchronous, so we kind of connect and do some stuff, and then I can send them off to do some problems with a friend virtually or solo. But I'm thinking about when I do some synchronous time and do breakout rooms of giving each breakout room like just a fun non-mathy question. So because I'm thinking also this year, some of them won't even know their classmates. When we went online in the spring last year, they already knew each other. But some of them don't know some of their classmates yet. A lot of them don't know me yet. So I think just every single class period, there's going to be like go to breakout rooms, do this silly question, and then do these 3 math problems or something like that.
That's actually one of the pieces of feedback that my students gave me at the end of last semester. I was, we're a college class, we're here to do math. And they said, it could have been really great if you had done a little bit more of the stuff where we could just talk about life. And because I was, trying to get like having a rich mathematical experience, but they thought I could do a little more community building. And I would normally do some of that face to face. So they had a good point. So I think that's great because it's very different too to shift online after you've had time face to face versus if you're just meeting them. So I think really kind of doubling down on that effort will go a long way.
Yeah, and I was just blogging about this the other day. Using my debate structures from my book, I think will give kids a little bit of a safety net with people they don't know of a talking routine of how to just say something a little bit personal. So we'll have little silly debates, I'm going to call them, for just like 2 minutes at the start of each breakout.
Do you think there are aspects of distance learning that can improve student talk about math? I think online learning has sometimes it's been portrayed as a poor substitute for in-person teaching. But I'm wondering if this mode of communication doesn't have some strengths.
Yeah, my students told me the benefits that they experience. So, just to set a context, the way my math class would typically go would be we would have a problem that would be launched, and then they would work on it in groups. They would come share their drafts in progress of their initial thinking in groups. I would select and sequence a particular draft or two to be shared. Then they would go back to their groups and revise some more and then share out how their thinking evolved and changed. That would be how rough drafting goes. And so how they said it worked differently online was in class, when you're working in your group in face-to-face, you hear the other groups talking. And that can affect either how you think about the math or how you feel about your work on the math, because you wonder, like, should I be further ahead or should I be trying their strategy or, but in Zoom, when you're in the breakout groups, we use Zoom as our platform, but it's the same, right? If you're in a breakout room, you can't hear the other groups. And so they said they were more focused on just connecting with each other and not thinking about what the other groups were doing. I was also having the groups synchronously put up their evolving drafts on Google Slides, and the whole class had access to that slide deck. People could do this with Jamboard and other ways too. I think next year I'd try Jamboard instead of Google Slides. But the point being, a wiki space where people can put up their drafts, but they could all look at each other's drafts much more easily than face to face, right? So they could see, oh, what's group one doing? So even though they couldn't hear it, if they wanted to look, they could see. And I was fine with that. So the online space allowed more thinking to be visible to the whole class more quickly. So then after the groups were at a space where we began to talk about drafts in progress, they could go and look at each other's Google Slides, type notes. So you could hear more voices, not necessarily just the speakers, because they could go into the notes section of Google Slides and write what they thought. So more groups got feedback from more people. So I would say that those are two types of advantages we found. And the students told me that these were advantages to them, which I appreciated hearing.
I would say it was similar. I don't think it added something that strong in my classes. But I work at a school where we're a one-to-one laptop school, so all students are given a laptop. So students are already used to doing things like Desmo's activity builders, and when they submit their response, their explanation to a problem, it'll show on the screen responses from other students who have already gotten to that question, and so among the other things I use as well, technology-wise, they're already used to the mix of in-person talking and digitally talking. We just kind of cut out a lot of the in-person talking. I talked a lot with teachers lately about, I have discovered a personal rule that in Zoom, no one talks when there's more than 4 or 5 people in the room. So I have to do breakout rooms if I want them to really openly talk. When I have the whole class in front of me, students don't speak up. 1 or 2 might, but in general, students don't. So I had to adapt a little bit with using the chat box, using polls and stuff just to get some things going, and then going to breakout rooms. But I wouldn't say the amount of discourse decreased at all. It was just I had to adapt a little bit to the online space.
Were there particular ways that the online space seems to support debating for you?
That's something I'm working on. I played with it a little bit, but the crisis mode of the spring semester was just kind of getting through things the best I can and creating a good experience. Um, this summer, when I have had a few moments to think about it, I've been trying to reflect on things. Someone actually on Twitter shared with me a, a, a website that's made for building debates and builds this little tree of like pros and cons list
Ooh.
that I'm gonna play with having groups do. Kind of like you said with Google Slides, like they can see what different groups' thinking is. Like as a class, we can build these pros and cons lists for something of, would you rather use the elimination method or substitution, as the two columns. Yeah, I forgot what your question was, but
No, I think that's great. And I also think it's really important for us to be real with each other because, you're saying like what's in progress about your work. Like you're saying, you're moving further in that direction. So it's not realistic to expect to move online and to feel like we've already arrived in this space fully formed.
yeah. And my debates have taken much more of a writing version than a speaking version because it is so hard to speak up in Zoom unless you're in a breakout room.
Are you using any other formats aside from Zoom? Are there other services or apps that could complement Zoom's features?
I can tell you one thing I want to do, and I actually tried it for a book club with teachers around rough draft math, is Flipgrid's really new to me. And I think that that would be a great way for people to share their drafts or do debates and then share how their thinking changed and how their arguments would change. Have you tried Flipgrid yet, Chris?
Once in the spring, and I liked it a lot. There's actually someone on Twitter now that you remind me of that who did some debate stuff on Flipgrid, and she like shared her link with me so I could see it. And the kids all made a video of their claim and warrant, what their argument was, and they each had to respond to like one or two other students who didn't have a response yet. It was neat.
Yeah, and so I think people could talk about here's my first draft of my thinking with this problem, and then people could share their multiple drafts, and then people could interact with each other about their draft ideas, and then they could have a new one where they post, now here's my revision. So I think that it also would feel more personal to interact with a video than typing sometimes.
Hmm.
And even just changing it up, or maybe in a video you can have more visuals or different things. Well, it's probably not that different, but I just think that that whole interactivity with seeing people's faces and hearing people's voices, I wonder how that changes how people experience drafting or debating.
Hmm. That's true. I do like seeing them.
You were mentioning communicating with students. So I had college students and I was using email to communicate with them. And they said, Mandy, we use text. So I set up a remind.com system that they could opt into. And then in professional development that I participated in this summer, I was a participant, not a facilitator. The facilitator used remind.com as a texting system where you could ask the teacher questions during class about the problem. But it was really like ask for initial extra information and then you could write back to them. So I didn't think about using that as a way to communicate during class, as a way to facilitate. She had a specific structure. I'm giving you a problem without enough information. And as a group, you need to come up with what kinds of information you need. And then you can text me in this system. So I wonder about pedagogically ways of using messaging systems during class. It was helpful to be able to have a way to communicate while the groups were going with other groups you weren't visiting. And Zoom has ways to do that too, but there are options.
Yeah, definitely when they were in Zoom rooms, I got lots of chats like, come to our room, help us, or there's a way to like ask the teacher to come by.
Yeah.
Cool. Have the events of the past 6 months changed your perspective about education and how you teach?
That's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind when you ask that actually is some of my colleagues in my math department. Um, we had a long talk about what teaching is or what our goals are. A lot of my colleagues felt whenever their class period, quote, met, they had to be on. They had to be like on the computer, like looking at kids, interacting in some way. They're so used to the physical like bell schedule, and like the minute the bell rings, they have to be teaching kids math and interacting with students in the classroom. And they were having a hard time imagining going asynchronous or any kind of mix of synchronous and asynchronous. And we talked about, rather than your job being physically present with the kids during these select time periods, your job is by Friday, will they have learned like these 2 or 3 key concepts, and how do you help them get there, and how do you check in to make sure they're on their way there or they have achieved it. And that can be completely asynchronous, and you can actually be doing something else like grading or something during your class meeting time. But for math teachers, it was really hard. They're so used to just being on with the students, and it was an interesting conversation to talk about in that small way of just rethinking what teaching is.
I would say that everything and everyone became more vulnerable in this space of teaching and learning, and students shared much more about what's going on in their lives outside of school than I've had access to in the past. And I don't know if that's because of what's going on in the world or because I was asking them more. So I normally do things like I have meetings with all of my students. I don't have that many of them, so that's easier to do. But at the start of the semester, and different things that a lot of people do, like the name tense, where students would write a message to you at the end of class and you write back to them for a while, that Sarah Vanderwerf has taught us about. And Google Slides at the beginning of the semester that Howie Hua has taught us about, where students would post a picture and introduce themselves, and you have then a class Google slide deck. So I did all of these things that I normally do, and they became so much more important to have had in place than ever, because then they, had these relationships with each other and me. But I learned things like student got a new dog, stayed after class to show me things in their room, like the plants that they were growing. And I'm getting pictures now from students about how tall their sunflowers are that have grown. And I'm getting texts about new music. And I don't normally have that closeness with my students. College students, you only have them one semester. I tend to have a little bit of a higher boundary with personal life, but it's just, we're in a different space, and that's just been really lovely. And it makes me think maybe I shouldn't always have such high boundaries with my students. And so at the end of every class, I would always give a Google form to share something class related, but then also a very open, anything else you want me to know about your lives. And so I learned about whose family members were impacted by COVID, what kinds of jobs they had or their family members had, and how that it was affecting their mental state. And that helped me just think about how important that is, again, validating things we already know, but really trying to understand the people in the room and the lives that they're living. And I was glad that I was able to work with some folks who are willing to be open with me about their lives.
That's awesome. How often do you say you did those?
So my class met twice a week. So we met Tuesdays, Thursdays in the afternoon for 75 minutes. And it was like at the end of class, a Google form that we would do. It would just have usually 2 questions, something related to class, like what is a way that your thinking changed today, and what helped that change, and what else do you want me to know about what's going on in your life, or different kinds of prompts like that. And sometimes I would start the next class then with some quotes from the class-related question from the Google form. And I don't think you would need to do them every day. You could do it once or twice a week, or you can do that asynchronously as well.
I mean, Mandy, our whole world is a rough draft right now.
Well, that's exactly right. I often will, when I'm talking with folks about rough drafting, I say, I didn't realize this, but delving into the concept of rough drafts in learning actually was very liberating for me in my own life as a person. So if I'm going to really take seriously the notion that wherever you're at has a strength that we can learn about and build from, then how do I apply that to myself as a person and in my work? And just being open to constant revision, I think, is hard. And putting ideas out there that are brand new is a vulnerable thing to do, but we're all in that space right now for sure.
Yeah. And I would add, like, I'm trying to teach students to debate that their opinion matters as long as they can back it up with something. And don't just say anything you want, but say something that you believe in with some reason behind it. And I want to hear their opinions and different things. And especially as like when summer hit and like all the protests that have increased out there, and the Black Lives Matter, just the attention on these social justice causes. I'm hoping to continue this debate stuff going forward to keep empowering the young people, the next generation, so that they can speak up and can keep making a difference.
Yeah, I think we both really value helping people learn to, to really help people have them have spaces to exercise their voice and also learning to listen to each other, right? So to engage in debating and to engage in revising, you're not only putting ideas out there, you're trying to be open to other perspectives and to keep learning. And so I think both of those perspectives are important right now in the context of working for justice and working for peace.
Yeah, and I think we both, in our work, stress that it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to like just put something out there and get feedback and then revise. Same with the debates, yeah.
Oh, that's a great point. And I think it's a strong theme in both of your books and in Stenhouse's math books. Generally, it's about removing the anxiety around this kind of binary kind of thinking that you're either right or you're wrong.
Right. I would love math classrooms to be a space where students don't feel the pressure to perform being correct all the time, because then there's just only really one way to be mathematically smart. But if you can put out a draft of what you're currently thinking, and then people are oriented to try to understand you, trying to make sense out of what you're saying rather than to evaluate you, and trying to see what you can learn from someone else's draft, then more people can to have this space to be recognized for their mathematical competence and their strengths. And, we all want to be heard. And so if we can work on trying to hear each other and value what people have to say, I think that that's, like a better environment for everybody, math or otherwise. And also just normalizing that changing your mind in the face of new information, like initially we were encouraged not to purchase masks because the healthcare industry needed them. And then with new information that cloth masks actually help us, we can revise our stance about masks in the face of new information. And so the idea that rough drafting and revising can be an orientation that helps us with math, but also just as being a citizen in the world, I think is important.
I just ditto all of that. Yes, I agree with that. Like I say all the time, I don't want math class to be about answer getting. I want it to be about sharing your thinking and your processes. And in the debates, we're sharing our opinion of like what the best method is or the best model for the situation. And you may be correct in finding a solution, but so may someone else who does it a totally different way. And in understanding and embracing that, listening, having empathy, like all of that are life skills that I want the next generations to have.
Just wondering, does being online perhaps encourage some students to open up a little more?
I would say sometimes you hear from different people. Mm-hmm. So some students who were in the physical space of the face-to-face classroom were not necessarily the ones that were ready to type right away in the chat box or willing to unmute and share. And I don't know why different people are drawn to different modalities, but I think they are. And I think that if you have these interactive like Google Slides, more people can participate in the same time, or like in the chat box or in the poll, then you can have those polls and things in class, like Kahoot and different things, but being able to make sure you can have them online seems pretty important to bring everybody in. But I do think certain people are participating in different ways, and I don't know enough about that. Did you see that at all, Chris?
Yeah, it really varied. Like there could be some students who were less talkative in some form in person, who were interested in more chatting or even just speaking on Zoom, but also vice versa. Like some kids were less interested in sharing out in the virtual world. So I don't have any data or things on that, but I just saw like a wide change for some students, and
And
some were the same.
yeah, and there was this space where a hurdle was if you're working on paper to, draw a representation or something, you can normally just turn your paper to show your colleagues. And so we had this whole learning curve of like, how do I take a picture of it and upload it to the Google Slides? And they were all helping each other with that. So it became like this community project where they wanted to like make sure they could show each other's work. And so they did have this desire to want to still show that work, which seemed to carry over. After the initial learning curve, it was fine, but being able to put, on maybe the Zoom whiteboard, different people were more comfortable writing on that whiteboard than others. Different people were more interested in uploading the picture of their work or hanging back and looking at somebody else's picture.
Yeah, that's the one thing, like when you were talking about how groups would overhear other groups in the classroom and it might give them a little nudge or a little pacing idea. Same thing, like within groups, it was so easy to just write something down and like show it to someone else. And now it's so hard. And I wish, without having to use another app, which we might invest in, I wish Zoom had a way for like a second device, just like hover over like a document camera, like hover your phone over something and people could see that screen as well. Because it's just the quick sharing is what's missing in the virtual world.
Yeah, I could sign in also with my iPad and then share the screen on the iPad and kind of write on it and draw on it. But different people have different devices. And so not everybody could log in with two devices.
I don't know if I want 30 kids to each have two devices signed on and then we have this giant room.
Yeah. That's a lot to manage.
Yeah. Yeah, but that casualness of just being able to show something really quickly is missing. Also, they don't have dry erase boards, and I'm a big believer in the vertical non-permanent surface research and Peter Liljedahl, and I have whiteboards on like most of my wall space in my classroom, and so students can easily send the whole class like up to the board with a partner and they can work on something, and they're so used to just trying something and erasing it with their hand, they can quickly keep changing their mind, and it's a lot harder to do that on paper when you're not even with someone physically. So the number one thing I learned also from online last spring is everything takes at least twice as long, so I do a lot less amount of work.
I agree with that. Just taking time to try to understand each other through the video medium. And like I was saying, putting up your work to be shared, it's extra time for sure. But that's not a bad thing, right? Because then we think about what is the truly important set of ideas we want the folks to take away. And maybe face-to-face learning actually should be taking that long too, is one thing I've thought about as well.
Same here. We wonder a lot about why we teach so many tangential topics related to everything, or why we have to cover every single nitpicky thing, other than is the expectation of society or something. Like, can we narrow down what really is necessary? And I want to build good thinkers and not just people who have these 100 formulas memorized.
Exactly.
Cool. We're running a little low on time here. I don't want to keep you. But is there anything you'd like to add?
I am definitely interested in hearing from other folks who have tried to move any of these ideas about debate math or rough draft math online themselves. And, Chris and I are active on Twitter. I'm Mandy Math Ed. What's your handle, Chris?
Just C Luzniak, and my last name,
Yeah, so, continuing that conversation that way, folks have shared with me some strategies that they've used. The Google Slides idea is something that I learned from Teresa Wills, who works at George Mason University, and I know a lot of other people have been using Jamboard and different things. I've been thinking about how different Google Slides versus Jamboard can be. So Jamboard is another interactive slide that everybody can write on in the same time, but the way it's set up for the student is that all these icons are right on the side, like a Post-it and a pen and a text box thing and all this. And Google Slides, it's kind of hidden. You have to like drag it down, and it just felt more of this interactive space. And so I wonder what people think about the difference between Jamboard in Google Slides and the pros and cons of that. Because in the Google Slides, all the slides are together, but with the Jamboard, you have to have all the group's Jamboards kind of open at the same time to compare and contrast them.
So give and take, yeah.
I think one of the interesting things over the last several months has been the sense that because everything's so up in the air, it's kind of an opportunity to be able to try different things because the circumstances have changed so much.
Right. And so I think an example of that is playing with folks that have been, if we've been used to teaching synchronously, what does any of this look like in the asynchronous space? I think a lot of us have thought about that in different ways. And so with rough drafting, it might be there's a problem that it's going to be related to an important idea, but you would have students work on it over multiple days. And so wherever your discussion board space is, like in Schoology or something, or Google Classroom, posting a first draft the first couple days of the week where people comment on it during the week, and then you can post a revision or turn in an individual revision near the end of the week after you've gotten some feedback and seen other people's drafts. So I think for me, that's a really new thing. What does any of this look like in the asynchronous space? And I don't know, sounds like, Chris, one of the things you've done would be Desmos in an asynchronous way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and other things as well, yeah. Back to your comment earlier, though, just about Twitter, like, yes, you and I are out there. We're all entering really uncharted territory of how to like move our math classes, math lessons into this virtual world in a large way. Even if it's just for a couple of months and then the world gets better, who knows? But the community that's on Twitter and just relying on each other, because I don't have this figured out, and most of my colleagues are struggling in different ways, but the more we share and throw out things, the more we can figure out what works best for us and our students. I know like even Stenhouse has done a good job keeping the authors connected, like you and I are here. And
that's right.
And just like having different communities where we can just brainstorm out loud and share ideas. Like, I don't know what Jamboard is. Now I'm going to go look it up.
Oh, cool.
But yeah.
I agree. It was really helpful last semester, right? When people were sharing about how they were navigating some of the experiences they were having, and even, you know, our feelings about it too. And being a part of this larger process together. And there's an aspect of self-compassion is being a part of a common humanity. And so being in that space online together through Twitter, I think has helped me a lot.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, even just someone complaining about how hard it has been online was just nice to know that I'm not alone.
Not alone.
I empathize with you. Yes, thank you for putting that out there and being vulnerable.
You can find Mandy on Twitter at MandyMathEd and Chris at C. Luzniak. You can also check him out at clopendebate.wordpress.com and luzniak.com. I'll leave links for all of this in the description. Rough Draft Math, Revising to Learn by Amanda Jansen, and Up for Debate, Exploring Math Through Argument, grades 6 through 12, by Chris Luzniak, are available at stenhouse.com. And that wraps up another episode of Teacher's Corner. Check out our website at stenhouse.com, where you can find podcast archives, book previews, study guides, and more. If you haven't done so already, we'd appreciate it if you can take 1 minute to give us a review at Apple Podcast, Stitcher, or whatever podcast player you use. It means a lot. If you've done so already, thank you. Please consider sharing this with a friend or colleague who you feel could get something from it. And as always, thank you for listening, and if you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Send your thoughts to us at marketing@stenhouse.com. Until next time, stay safe and healthy.